So we've all heard this before, right? Peasants and serfs had a terrible lifestyle with terrible working hours and terrible outlooks on life. Well, I mean, they might have, at least. So while exploring more of this issue and into the day-to-day life of those at the bottom of the medieval social ladder, I often ask myself, so what did these people eat? Or more specifically, what did the peasants and serfs and laborers eat? When it comes to medieval food, honestly, the source to reference is the form of curry, the oldest cooking manuscript written in the English language. Originally compiled towards the end of the 14th century by English royal cooks, presumably for Richard II, this book contains 196 recipes and texts that included both the common pottages and common meats for the household, as they should be, craftily and wholesomely, and, more over-the-top foods for the royals and such, curious pottages and meats and subtleties for all manner of states, both high and low. However, the form of curry does have its limitations. Although the preface of the book does try to discuss the multiple cultures and customs and origins and countries that the recipes are compiled from, it was still a manuscript made for the English royalty by English royalty. Therefore, it probably neglects some of the more obscure or colloquial foods and customs beyond the scope of what English royalty would have understood at the time, especially those of peasants and serfs and those in the lower classes. That said, the form of curry still provides an insight to the specific recipes used during medieval times. An interesting example I picked out was a recipe on tarts of fish, or fish pastries. And no, I don't speak Old English, so here goes. Take eels and salmon and smite him on pieces, and steam it in almond milk and various. Draw up on almond milk with the stew. Pick out bones clean of the fish, and save the middle piece whole of the eels and grind that over fish small. And do thereto powder, sugar, and salt, and grated bread. And force the milk together, and color it with saunders. Make a crust in a trape as before, and it therein and serve it forth. Okay, so essentially stew salmon and eels in almond milk, then grind sugar, herbs, salt, bread, and your stewed eel. Put that in a tart pan on top of your already stewed salmon, and then bake the pastry and serve the dish. Recipes like this one were actually not that uncommon for peasant households. I mean, as long as there was a supply of fish nearby, like a river, lake, or ocean, and the surrounding area was not struck by famine. But most peasants actually ate quite hefty and rustic meals to keep up with the caloric demands of manual labor and tenanting a piece of land. Additionally, this recipe is actually very consistent with the overall intake of various food groups of the poor in the Middle Ages. Most peasants ate some form of pottages or pies, as they were easy to cook, and you can leave them on a charcoal fireplace over time. And rustic and grain-dense breads were also very common, as the staple of medieval Europe was some form of wheat or barley. Although bread types did vary between different classes, such as the nobility having white bread because they were harder to process, while the lower classes, such as peasants and serfs, had to stick with whole grain bread. Additionally, there was also a good amount of sugar and salt in the foods for both flavor and preserving factors. Also, as a side note, the peasant's diet was actually not that different from the monk's diet during the medieval period. Although finding physical evidence of food production in ancient monasteries is scarce and difficult to trace, historians have deduced that monks ate a lot of grains in the form of barley, cereals, alcohol, and bread. They were also given lean portions of eggs, pork, and fish. Honestly, whatever was available for slaughter during a particular season, and if they had the availability in their surrounding environments. Those factors aside, it was really up to themselves what they allowed themselves to eat, depending on how strictly they adhered to the rule of Saint Benedict. So the bland and detestable food that we usually associate with the peasants of medieval Europe is actually not a thing. I mean, aside from times of famine. The diet for your average peasant was quite substantial and very flavorful. Additionally, the process for making such foods was also somewhat complicated and labor-intensive. Granted, these people definitely needed to have access to specific herbs and ingredients.